All right, so it looks like we have our slides up and ready. So thank you tonight for listening to this presentation. We were going to discuss just the PSSA results and the Keystone results from the 2020-2021 school year. So a couple of the items that we're going to address first are the district summary data, which includes the ELA, English Language Arts, by grade, which is the grades 3 through 8 data, mathematics by grade, and our students take those assessments grades 3 to 8, and then science by grades, and those students take those assessments in grades 4 and 8. Additionally, we're going to talk about the cohort data. Cohort data, I'll explain a little bit more in detail about how that is calculated. We're going to talk about the Future Ready PA Index and action plans that we have for this year and moving forward. Just as we go into some of this, I want to make sure that we take into some considerations. Overall, the PSSA state participation rate was down about 27% last year. Again, the ranges from participation range from anywhere from 69% to 76% across the Commonwealth. Keystone data, that even was a farther drop. The Algebra 1 Keystone exam was about a 15% decrease across the state. The biology was about a 52% decrease, and the literature was a 91% decrease. That decrease for 91% really is attributed to many school districts have their students take that Keystone either in 9th grade or 10th grade, and those students then were waived in that 2020 school year. So just kind of thinking about what happened in that year, they were able to take that assessment then moving forward with the basically proficient score, given that the state gave that waiver in 2020. Additionally, I want to make note that there was about a 52% drop in the reportable exams across the entire state in all content areas. And our participation rate was anywhere between 65.8% all the way up to 97.6%. That includes all grade levels, buildings, et cetera. And then as we get into the rankings, I really want to make sure that we're paying close attention to, this is relative numbers to the number of schools and the number of students that have taken this assessment across the state. So a little bit out of sorts compared to maybe what we would have seen in different years. And just another note, we typically have a consistency participation rate of 95% or higher. So knowing that all of that, I just want to frame that conversation as we go into this data. So I want to make sure as we're doing this, we really can't draw conclusions, but I just want to make sure that we have understandings that there was a significant decrease in overall participation, which will obviously likely impact the results both here and across the state. So as we get into this, what I tried to do is have each slide when we're looking at trends to be similar. So I'm going to take an extra second or so at this particular slide to make note of how they're set up. So this is the 3rd grade trends. This is trends across different students across different years. So at the top, you'll see which grade level it is. In this case, we're looking at grade 3, the English Language Arts and Math trends. The numbers on the side are the percent proficient and advanced. That's what the bars represent. And then at the bottom, it is the ELA on the left-hand side, and then math. And when we get to science, the science will be on the next column. And then you can see at the bottom, we have 2018, 2019, and 2021. Again, we missed the 2020 year data. So what I did was I went back and looked at the trends from 18, 19, and then information from 2021. So I'll just kind of point out a little bit here as we go through. Obviously, you can take any notes. I can take questions at the end. But taking a look at our 3rd grade information from 18, 19, and 21, you can see that we have the proficiency rate around that 78 to 79% or so for ELA, and around between that 72 and 75% for math for 3rd grade. Similar setup for 4th grade, as I had mentioned, the 4th graders take the science exam as well. So you'll be able to see here that we have the percent proficient and advanced, again, for the 18, 19, and 2021 school years. We always really do very well in our science exams in 4th grade, so you can see that trend over time. But the dip did happen a little bit in math, and you'll see that across each of the grade levels. I think as we go through this, you'll be able to see that math did take a little bit of a hit in the overall scores, but you'll see in our rankings, we really held true to our rankings across the state. So we'll get into some of those action plans in a little bit. I jokingly said that committee, when we look at the previous slide, for some of us, our brains really look at the graphs, and some of us like to look at tables. So I did set this table up So across the top here, we have the by subject grade, then again, the percentage of advanced or proficient for 18, 19, and 21. And then that's the state average of their proficient level. And then I showed that the plus that we have in our district for the number of percentage of students outperforming the state average. So just taking a look again, same information on those previous slides, but knowing and taking a look that we outperformed the state by anywhere from that 13.8% in science all the way up to that 26.9% in that fourth grade math. So I'll just give you a second to take a look at that. And then below that, we'll talk a little bit about our rankings. And I know it's a little bit on the smaller side, but looking at the bottom of the slide there, it says grade 3 ELA ranking. This is again, when we're thinking about all of our schools in the elementary buildings, we ranged anywhere from the top 2% to the top 35% in the state. And then in math, it was anywhere from the top 5% to the top 30% in the state. And then going over to the other side with ELA, you can take a look, the same thing. For fourth grade, it was anywhere from the top 3 to the top 28%. Math was the 4th to the 19th, and science was the 5th, bless you, to the 24th% in the state. So taking a look, we're going to move into the 5th and 6th grade information. This is specifically 5th grade, both ELA and math again. You can take a look at see what we did for 18, 19, and 2021 in ELA. Those measures are pretty close to the same. ELA did take a little bit of a dip. In math, you can see 66.4, 63.9, and then 49.4. And I'll talk a little bit more when we get to our action plans, but really when we take a look at 5th grade, knowing that when students lost some of that time in the end of 4th grade and then back and forth in the hybrid environment and making sure we're getting all the content covered in 5th grade year, there are gaps that happen. And so we've recognized that, and Dr. Murray will talk next month a little bit about our comprehensive plan and the action steps we're taking as a district. This is the 6th grade data. You'll see it looks very similar to the 5th grade data. Taking a look, we have the 83.0, 83.7, and then 79.7% in ELA. The math goes 67.8, 69.9, and then down to 49.9 during that last school year. This is a similar table. I want to just point out again, I know that it sometimes when we look at bar graphs, it's a little difficult to understand or compare to what we're doing across the state. So I have that state average in that second to last column there. And then the comparison with the plus there is the 20.6% over the state in ELA in grade 5, 22.4% over in the ELA in grade 6, 13.1% in math for grade 5, and 21.7% in grade 6 for math. And then taking a look at the bottom, you can see our rankings for 5th grade. We were in the top 12% in the state. For ELA, 5th grade math was the top 21% in the state. 6th grade was the top 7% for ELA and the top 4% in the state for 6th grade math. So the other thing we wanted to take a look at is really what were the impacts of COVID? And we looked at 7th and 8th grade trends because we could go back that number of year of data. Taking a look at the 7th grade trends. So you could see from 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19, taking a look at where we were. And then when I get to the next slide, you'll be able to see, I'll have 18, 19, and 21 again. So just taking a look at those percentages. And when I looked at this slide today, we had actually taken this from one of the previous presentations you've seen. So I do have the percentages on for 16, the second column there for ELA should be 86.2, then 80.8, 83.0, and 85.1. So this is just like those other slides I had shared with you for 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. For 18, 19, and 21, you can see where we were for ELA, pretty consistent in the 18, 19 school year. And then it dropped a little bit last year. In math, we can see 66.7, then 70%, and then down to 51.2%. And again, I just want to point out where we were as compared to the state. In the ELA area, the state average is 53.3%. We were above that by 20.9%. And then for math, the state average was 26.9, and the state comparison is 24 plus 24.3%. I want to just point out again the rankings for our 7th grade building. For ELA, we were top 7%, and in math, in the top 4%. So although those scores did dip down, you can see a comparison across the state, we're still holding our ground. This slide is similar to the previous one. We talked about the 5-year PSSA data trend for 8th grade. So I'll give you a second to take a look, but just noticing that the data previously was pretty consistent for each of both the math, ELA, and then and including science in this particular slide. And then when we take a look at the trends from, this is 18, 19, and just the 21, you can see it looks similar to some of the other grade levels, pretty consistent, 18 and 19, and then 21 does drop off both for ELA, math, and for the science. Same slide like the previous. I just want to point out again where we are with comparison to the state. And I think it's really important to take a look, even with those math scores in the 8th grade, we can see that for ELA, we were in the top 5, and then math, it's in the top 12% of the state. And then for science, it's the ranking of the top 3% in the state. We'll move into some biology, literature, algebra 1 and biology Keystone exams. Those are end of course exams for those 3 subjects. And this is the trend data from 18, 19, and 21. Our students outperformed themselves in some of the areas in 2021, but like I mentioned, there were many fewer students overall that would have taken some of these exams. So again, that data could be a little bit changed just based on the number of students. Similar type of slide that we had on the previous, I wanted to just point out here that you can see the state average of where the students across the state performed, and that next column where it says springboard, our students outperformed by 37.3%, 32.3%, and 30.5%. And at the bottom, it's pretty exciting to see that our students ranked in the top 2% in the state for literature, the top 1% in the state in algebra 1, and the top 1% of the state for science, for the biology. I wanted to also just make sure that you are well aware, as well as our community, that we have something in Pennsylvania called the Future Ready PA Index. This was launched in 2018, really to move away from that single measure of just a data score of PSSA or Keystone. I want you to note, if you do go to this site, that it hasn't been fully updated. The dashboard is just due to the limiting factors of information and data that was able to be collected from last school year. And it is also a limiting factor because we don't have 3 years of consistent data from the state, because we had 2020 not having data, not having assessments and reporting categories. So as far as the Future Ready PA Index, it focuses on 3 main reporting categories: the state assessment measures, OnTrack measures, and college and career measures. And then the items that I bulleted underneath are really just the reporting measures for each of those subcategories. So if you would like, you can go to that site. I have it linked in our slides. We'll make sure we put that on our website for everyone to be able to access and understand. But those are just reporting measures that schools get to be able to understand where they rank within their school systems and then across the state. The next piece I want to talk a little bit about is our cohort data, and really just looking at what that actually means and the impacts of COVID to our students. So cohort data is really just meaning the last set of data we looked at groups of students over, grade levels of students over time. So they were different students in any given year, 3rd grade class in 2018, the 3rd grade class in 2019, and so forth. When we look at cohort data, it's the same group of students over the course of their education career, if you will. So I have data from the 2025 class, which is our current 9th grade, the 26th class, which is the current 8th grade, 2027, which is our current 7th graders, and the class of 2028, which is our current 6th graders. And the reason we have that information in those particular grade levels is we can go back to their 3rd grade year and take a look at the PSSA information. So we'll take a look here just for a quick second. So this is our class of 2025. These are our current 9th grade students. So the way the cohort data is that these are all of the students that we would have had in 3rd grade, and they're all of the same students we would have had in 4th, 5th, 6th, and then in 8th grade. So if a student moved or came in outside of that band, they would not be included in this information. On these slides, what I did for the 19 and 21 school years for your frame of reference, I wanted you to see where the state bar ranked so that you could kind of see in comparison of where we are in comparison to the state. So taking a look pretty consistently, looking at our ELA scores, they're in that 79.9 up. They had a bump up in that 1 year in 6th grade, which we have seen over the trends in many years. So all around that about 80% or so. And then for math, pretty consistent. They had a little dip down in 5th grade. Again, that's very common in the data that we've seen across the state. And then last year, there was a significant drop off in the 8th grade math scores. Taking a look at the next set, this is our current 8th graders. So we have data from them for grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, and then grade 7. Similar slide like the last set, just taking a look at those same students over time. Again, taking a look, they were around that 82 to 83% before COVID, and then dropped a little bit in the 7th grade PSSA. Taking a look at the math, again, they were around that 73 or so in 3rd and 4th grade, dropped a bit in 5th grade, and then by 7th grade, when after COVID, that number went down a little bit. This class is the class that is currently in 7th grade. So we have the data from them in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 6th grade. You can see the kind of the same trend happened. Their ELA score did pop up in that 4th grade year and went down a little bit in that 6th grade year. And math has dropped off a little bit in that 6th grade year. And then this is our current 6th grade class, the class of 2028. We have data from them from grade 3, and then again last year from grade 5. Similar patterns, we see the ELA scores dip a little bit, and the math is a little more significant. The other piece of that Future Ready PA Index, they look at 2 pieces of information, and this is, they look at grade 3 OnTrack reading measures and grade 7. And this indicator is really just a percentage of students who demonstrate that OnTrack proficiency on the PSSA, and there are students that we've had to have had for the full academic year. So you can see this broken down by building. Again, this is one of those measures that you, if you go to that Future Ready site, they'll have there listed by school or by building if it's one of our middle level buildings, but you can see where we are. And this is reflective pretty much closely to the scores that I just showed you. The only difference is some of the scores may have been attributed to us in a full growth versus a student who may not have been with us for the entire year. And that's what this would reflect. So given all of that, I really want to focus in on where we are and what we're doing next. As you know, we have been focusing on what we are calling Spring Forward Learning, and that's really, the students are the most important piece of that at the top, and then each piece of the curriculum, the assessment, instruction, and management of that, we're really focusing on building each of those pillars, building that mindset of making sure that we're thinking about the whole child with the social emotional learning, making sure that we're working on resiliency and building cultural proficiency and equity. So thinking about that, I want to specifically just talk for a couple minutes on some action plans that we've been working on within our buildings, within our instructional coaching teams, within our teacher leader teams, making sure that we're focusing in on the supports that students need in order to continue to support and grow our students. So without doing the read aloud, I want to just make sure that you recognize that we're working in guided math groups, focusing on math RTI, looking at the data and seeing where we have maybe some gaps. We use a product called ST Math, which helps support students at their own individual levels and working through that. We've been working as much as we can with flexible grouping to meet students' needs. And then thinking about for reading, we're working on small group instruction, working through that RTI model. Obviously, with last year's impacts, we didn't have as much of a RTI model in place because of movement with students. We've been working on parent outreach, IEP supports, and the instructional support team interventions, and really looking at that assessment data. Yes, we have PSSA data and we have the Keystone data to look at, but in the classroom, we have day-to-day operational classroom data. We also use NWEA MAP, which is another assessment that we use. We have Ames Web data. So those are kind of the real-time data that we can make classroom decisions. And then we look at things at the district level. Building principals are looking at their building data, looking at student and teacher data, and then obviously our teachers are drilling down to the very individual student level data. We have been working on standards review and vertical alignment. We've been building our professional learning communities through our instructional coaches and curriculum supervisors. As you'll see tonight, we have on the agenda several people on the agenda to be approved for summer RAMs, which will be our program for K-8 for reading and math. And then we also have established the before and after school tutoring. taking a look for that, and those are for all of our elementary buildings. And the action plans for 5, 6, and 7 are very similar to those, but focusing on targeted checks, which is a strategy that we use for data when we use data collection, making sure that we understand what our students know and then take actionable steps to help them continue to develop in the content. Each of those grade levels, we're meeting twice monthly with teachers, working through curriculum to build checkpoints for understanding, creating differentiated lessons to meet the individual needs of students. We've been focusing on ed tech competencies, really making sure that since we have devices in the hands of students, being able to use that information through like Google Forms or other type tools that we can collect information to be able to help support the student learning. And again, like I mentioned before, looking at that building level data, teacher and student level data. The coaching model is put into place for the use of interventions. And again, we'll have the summer RAMs and before and after school tutoring. 8th grade is very similar to some of those other action plans. We're making sure that we're using our NWEA data to make sure that we see where our students currently are and where we can help support them. And we will also have the summer RAMs before and also have the before and after school tutoring. And then for our 9 to 12 buildings, we're looking at creating plans at content level meetings. So our content facilitators have been addressing any curriculum gaps. They're increasing instructional practices for those students that are in need of those particular areas of maybe weakness that are showing up. And then we're evaluating our common assessment data at data meetings to monitor student data and student progress. So benchmark assessments, midterm exams, and so forth. Addressing areas of need and focus on continuing best practices at faculty meetings. We're engaging our students with the Smart Futures and Career Standards benchmark. So we've been focusing on improving that and working on targeted instruction related to Algebra 1, biology, and literature through our tutoring program. 2 more things. I just want to point out a couple of points of our pride that we have. We have a comprehensive planning team that has put together and identified action steps to move us forward. We have addressed a learning loss tutoring plan, the summer programs, and we have social, emotional, and mental health resources available to our students. And our students really were high achieving after all of that and all of the things that they challenged through last year. But they really did outperform many of the other schools across the state. And though we recognize that COVID did have an impact on our students, we expect with the learning loss supports put into place, we expect our scores to be able to rebound this school year. And next fall, hopefully we'll have all of our data in a timely fashion, and we'll be able to present this to you more in our typical time in November and not so much in late March, early April, like it happened to be this year. So I want to make sure that we share that information. The last thing I have on here is really that, and I'll make sure I work with Ms. Crew to make sure our families can get to this information, but there's Keystone exam and PSSA information that'll be available. There is a Future Ready PA glossary for some of these terms, a Future Ready PA index, the actual tool that you can go and visit and view the data, whether it's for Springford or any school in Pennsylvania. And there are also some family and teacher resources available on that site as well. So I will pause there. I do have some, I don't know if I'm getting.
No, thank you very much, though, for that. Before I open it up to the board for questions, you know, we've talked about this at the curriculum meeting. This was hard data to look at because, you know, as the Pennsylvania Department of Education had even said, this isn't the most reliable data because normally they're pretty stable with the amount of participants. Last year, people were allowed to opt out more than just for religious purposes. And so there was a lot more opting out. So it's not as consistent data. This is reflective though, too, of our learning loss. And as you can see, it's not just Springford, it's across the state that we're seeing this, these declines. I know that, you know, you and I have had these conversations too about really the most important thing is what we're doing moving forward. Some of this we've already addressed with ESSER money and we've put things in place already. And some of it we are continuing to learn and adapt as we go. I know we've talked about accelerated learning, that idea of not only do we need to give our students a year's worth of information this year, but we need to determine where they, where the gaps are, that learning loss in those gaps. And that, that data collection that you're doing, that constant assessments that you have in place, using a couple of the data tools there that
NWEA math, we
thank you.
use that for grades 1 through 8 in math and 3 through 8 through reading. And then Ames Web we use for K-2 for
Great.
reading.
Thank you, because that's what's going to help with that, when we can determine exactly what those gaps are and what our students need to learn going forward. It's tough with the math, as we saw. There was some significant drops there with grades, the decreases in that 5th through 8th, and what to do to have those students ready, not just for that secondary math, but also moving forward. I know there are a lot of other things that we are doing also besides the assessing and the students, and adapting our curriculum in our teaching to meet those needs. One of the things we've talked about too is with the clubs and engaging students and getting them back into learning, and also addressing the mental health issues of our students. There's a lot, and the parent outreach to get the parents more involved. So thank you for presenting this. And I know if there, you need to keep letting us know what you need, and hopefully we can continue to watch that, we can watch that gap close for next year.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. One thing that we will be bringing to committee will be a recommendation. I know Dr. Murray has shared with you before when we were looking at another product that we used last summer that would be for all students. And so we've done an evaluation of our current products, and we'll be bringing a recommendation to the committee next month so that we can talk about that and then bring it to the full board, if you would pull that through to the board, so that we can address, it'll address some individualized learning paths, whether students are behind. We did address mostly tonight the data of what it looked like, of where we hope our students will achieve this year, but we can recognize, obviously, we have many students that did not lose any ground and were very successful last year. And so we'll continue to stretch them with some of these products that we're talking about. So I'm looking forward to bringing that to the committee next month.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, remediation and acceleration. Great. Is there anyone at the board? Did you want to start?
Ms. Gardy, thank you for bringing this presentation to us. I know it was a lot of numbers, so thank you for putting it in a very plain talk type of way. I want to be cautious because, as you said, I don't want to extrapolate too much from this data, since it is a point in time, and since, like both you and Dr. Wright mentioned, it's not really clean data due to the participation rate. But I think there are some things that we can take away. Number one, the absolute scores were down, not just at Spring-Ford, across the state. Number two, on a relative basis, relative to the state, Spring-Ford performed well. But you did say one thing in the presentation that prompted a question in my mind, which is you mentioned that Spring-Ford was holding their ground relative to the state. And one thing that wasn't in here was to what extent on that relative basis, have we seen any noticeable widening or narrowing of the spread between Spring-Ford and the state? It may not be something you can answer right now, but I'm wondering if that is top of mind for you.
We have always looked at where we rank in the state based on, surrounding school districts, and we didn't pull that in this presentation, mostly because, again, like we mentioned, it's not really valid data if we're looking at a group of students that maybe only 300, and typically it's 1,000 for that particular school. But when I said hold our ground, you can see where we were as far as that gap, and each of those previous years we were still well beyond that 20 to 30% above the state. I did not do the ranking like that by county like we've done in the past, just because of the actual rates. But you can see back on those slides when it said the top 4%, top 1%, those are well above even some of the other areas. But I caution you again to not say, well, we're always the top 1%, because that was very relative. There were many school districts that had very, very low participation, or near to none, compared to what they would have typically had in a typical year. That's why I think it'll be so critical for us to really look at the information that we'll collect this spring into next fall to really see where we are in, commensurate it to across the state.
Agreed. I'll be very interested to see that. Thank you.
Okay, so I had a couple of questions, but I had a comment first that I really think you delivered the data in multiple formats that made it very clear and concise and easy to follow. So I very much appreciated that. I had a question about, and this might be for you or Dr. Murray. So I think this was, I can't put my finger on when this time frame was exactly, but we had, I think, Mrs. Gardy, you referenced it. We had a discussion about the RAMS program. You remember expanding that to use that tool all the time, and then the iReady, yes, the iReady. And then we pulled it back. And there was going to be an inventory of the products that you have. And Mrs. Gardy, you referenced that. So that inventory has been completed, and will there be that this new program would then either complement or replace some of what we have out there, correct?
That is correct. So next month, when we meet on the 11th at committee, I plan to share that with the committee members so that they can see the item that we're wanting to purchase and put in place. And then there are a couple items that we'll remove because it'll kind of be, if we bought both, then it would be double,
Right,
know,
and-
two things for
yeah.
math in third grade wouldn't make sense. like
Yeah,
that.
and we had talked about
Mhm.
that a little bit, but we were also looking to see like what dates they would fall off or they would expire so that the timing would be right. So it sounds like you're on that right track, which would then provide the differentiation for the students and provide that individualized instruction that they need to help, meet them where they are and move them forward. But the RAMS program, the summer program itself, that's still based on the iReady, correct? No.
No, our hope is to be able to use a new program, but the summer RAMs will be based on student needs regardless of what that program is. So I know that Katie has been working on that piece. So whatever program this is that we're going to be getting will complement the summer RAMs. But we're trying to create the programs so that it's not dependent on a product.
Okay, wonderful idea. Have you started, I know that there are many items on the agenda tonight too for approval. And we talked about some of that last week. Have you started recruitment of the students for that summer program?
So I've been working with our principals to really work through and identify, and so that in the next 2 weeks or so, we'd like to be able to make sure that before spring break, the first round of families would be invited to the program, because again, we're using student data to make sure that we're really targeting the students that need the most help. And then once those spots will be filled, any remaining spots will be open to our community for other families that weren't initially invited. So that has been working through. It's just based on schedules. We'll finish that out probably early next week. And then after that, we'll have information shared with families.
I just was mentioning that because I know last year it was like a mad dash race, right? So we don't want it to sneak up on us. We want to make sure that we get it out there, but it sounds like you're on top of that as well. So then my last piece was, yes, I think we can, many of us that understand this data as you presented it are also to understand that it's probably not very reliable or valid. Nonetheless, it's still will be at least considered for our rankings. So, and you did reference that after Mrs. Herman's just spoke too. Is your expectation that the rankings will stay relatively the same since you reported Springford in relation to the other districts in our state? And we were able to see that Springford is still significantly, the percentages in most cases were still significantly higher. So is your expectation that our rankings will remain relatively unchanged, at least for this year?
I believe so, except for that PD has really asked us not to rank, and I don't know what information they will share similarly like they've done in the past, because it was sort of I don't want to say a warning, but a warning like, don't look at this information the same way you would have in the past. So when we look at some of like Newsweek and rankings like that, those are more on those other like AP exams and SAT and some of those types of rankings, attendance and those types of areas. So I'm not sure that PDE will actually put anything out and say, this is where you landed. We did this internally with the data files that we were able to accomplish and go through and take a look at everything. It's a little bit different than what they've done in the past, but we were able to do that as a comparison. But when we looked at the data, there were, again, schools that might have 2,000 students in a certain grade level band, and they had several hundred in there instead. So again, I just want to be really cautious about looking at anything. I think what is really telling though is that double digit over the state average gain. None of our areas were below that. And so I think that's really, I mean, I would expect that, but at the same time, it's really great to see that our students are continuing to outperform by those double-digit returns. So I think that shows me again, I think Mrs. Herman said it, like the return that we have is in comparison to who actually did take the exam, and we did outperform other schools based on that information.
So with that in mind, and with, as I said, the format for how you basically presented it in different ways, could I just ask that we see something similar next year with the new data added in the fall? It would be then crystal clear to say, hey, did we naturally rebound? Did we rebound because of the different programs that were put in place? You know, what can that be attributed to? Or, I mean, first and foremost, we want to see the rebound, right? So I would just respectfully ask that you do something similar in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I would expect to do a similar, just because again, comparing apples to apples. The other piece we did talk about and we didn't include tonight were things like the AP exam results and SAT scores, again, for the purpose of this presentation and the data that was available. But next school year, it would be more quote traditional as far as the items. So we'll have a little bit more comprehensive piece in there as well. Thank you.
And to clarify that this is being done at this time because the Keystone and PSSA data was not available when it normally would be, because the state extended the deadline for schools to submit. So that's why we're kind of off with this now. Anyone else at the table?
I just had a comment. I know, thank you so much for your presentation. And, you know, it's very important to have a benchmark to see, you know, whether it's the best data. It's good that we have something to kind of base the past couple years off of. But something that I wanted to speak to, I guess, and I know your presentation is on these results, but something that impacts the results was like a little piece in the slide that you presented with the different pillars of your model, which kind of talks about the social and emotional learning piece, because I think it kind of brings it back to, you know, giving school breakfast. So if you can't learn if your belly's not full. So if either in curriculum or at some point, just kind of, because I know there was 2 years of a lot of flexibility with curriculum, with, you know, assignments being handed in and from the state, and, you know, just we're trying to get through the past 2 years. So I think as we make that shift, it is an adjustment for the students where there's a little bit more accountability that could weigh on them. So I just would be interested maybe in curriculum or at some point to hear a little bit about, do we feel like those students feel supported in those ways as they make that adjustment back to normal? Thank you so much.